Shabbat Shalom. Feels poignant to be reading, especially the first triennial portion of Parashat Shoftim, about the need for judges in Israel and the need for judges for us to listen to what they say and to not depart to the left or to the right from it. And we are in a time in which the role of judges in Israel is much discussed. But I want to focus on a particular religious dimension of it here on Shabbos and what would be appropriate to think about on this day. On this day, think about what it is that the specific issue, besides all of the larger political issues in theater, what specifically is a ruling that is problematic for those who speak in the name of religion. And so publicly, two of the Haredim parties that joined the coalition, specifically with the intent to pass the law that 7 months of protests are against, their demand is actually to overturn a ruling that the Supreme Court made, or I call it the Supreme Court, the Israel High Court, and they want the passage of a basic law that would officially recognize full-time Torah study as an alternative to army service. So, it's interesting to have this when in the same parsha of Shoftim, we have a discussion of what makes one eligible for the deferral of military service. I've heard Rabbi Daberson speak really beautifully about this in the past from later portions of this parsha, and so it comes up. We know that military service in the Torah is repeated over and over again. It's the very beginning of the book of Bamidbar. It's a census that everyone must serve. It repeats what's already in Shemot. And it's really clear, although there it's able-bodied men between the ages basically of 20, depending on the calculation, and up to a certain age, that they should all be drafted and that they should all serve. And the deferments are listed here in today's parsha, which essentially is a triple. I will leave it to Rabbi Daberson's teaching to cover the beautiful specifics of it, but things that amount to allowing those who are too scared to fight and cannot summon the courage for those to allow to return home, and that we give them the dignity of being allowed to do so, and a system of dignified fiction is set up for them to be allowed to go. So we have an idea of what the deferral system is there for and how it works. And so what is the theme of drafting in the Torah, and what is the theme of being exempt from it for Torah study? Is that in the tradition or is it not in the tradition? And as I just, spoiler alert, there's a debate about whether full-time Torah study is okay. So just to tell you where it's going to end up is that the debate is legitimate. So let's talk a little bit about Israel's army and whether it was inspired at all by the Torah's idea of everybody serving, and it was. So Israel's standing army is functioning because the standing army part is really relatively small for the population. But more or less, all able-bodied people within the population are reservists. And the reservists is what we count on when issues come up. That basically, the people's army, it's a people's army of Medinat Yisrael. So when the time comes that numbers are needed, everyone is prepared who is able-bodied and able and trained to serve and has the experience of being drafted. So the draft is in a sense to support the people's army, and that seems very much in the tradition of Torah itself. So what was the Supreme Court ruling that was considered so problematic? And it came, I'm just trying to find the exact quote. In his 1998 leading decision in the case of Rubinstein versus the Minister of Defense on the deferment of military service of yeshiva students, Supreme Court President Aharon Barak explained the reason for the deferment and its historical context as follows. This is the ruling of the court. The original reason for the arrangement was the destruction of the yeshivas in Europe during the Holocaust, and the wish to prevent the closing of yeshivas in Israel due to their students being drafted to the army. Today, this objective no longer exists. The yeshivas are flourishing in Israel, and there's no serious worry that the draft of yeshiva students, according to any arrangement, would bring about the disappearance of this particular yeshiva institution. And in a separate arrangement, going back to Ben Gurion and not the Ben Ish Chai, but trying to remember the chief rabbi of it. I'll get it in a second. The Chazon Ish. Sorry, thank you. In the Chazon Ish, the idea was at that time where they were talking about whether yeshiva students would go into the army, the argument of the Chazon Ish rabbi was that we're talking about very few numbers. So in order to save the yeshivas, we're talking about number of students in the hundreds that would be eligible for deferment. But part of the Supreme Court's decision is that that's evolved in time. To give you an idea of the number of deferments, there were 400 military deferments for those studying in yeshiva in 1970. By 1975, it was 800. By 1987, it was over 17,000. By the 90s, it was 30,000. By 2010, it was 61,000. We are talking now that the increase in percentage of those eligible who now eligible for military service who received the deferment went from 5% in the 1980s. It was 14% in 2007. And given the growth of the Haredim population, it's expected to expand dramatically. So if the reason for it at the time doesn't necessarily exist, and the Supreme Court has made their decision, now the pressure that's going on is that the Supreme Court shouldn't be allowed to overrule a law that could be passed on the deferment for military purposes. So going away from just the idea of military service, we all know that the larger issue here is the legitimacy of full-time welfare for those who are studying Torah, which is already received and is expanding at a dramatic pace. So 15+% of the workforce and rapidly rising receives a stipend not to have to work at a job, but can do full-time Torah study. So I want to ask, we have a little bit about the deferment issue. It really is part of the larger issue of whether it is in the interest of a Jewish state to support people doing full-time study and whether that's for the good. So if you have, I'm going to address that Jewishly now. If you've had the wonderful opportunity to study Pirkei Avot with Rabbi Daberson, you will realize that a lot of Pirkei Avot kind of touches on this issue and about like, should you be studying Torah full-time? Should you not be studying Torah full-time? And are these words of wisdom from our ancestors, or are these actually supposed to be things we're supposed to take seriously as halacha? You know who had the same question? Moshe Maimonides, close to Moshe Rabbeinu, the next Moshe. Moses Maimonides had the same question when he was codifying Jewish law for the Mishnah Torah. And he was trying to understand, do we take the statements in Pirkei Avot, how do we convert them into halacha, whether full-time Torah study is an admirable thing to do in a halachic context? So in his halacha code, the Mishnah Torah, he begins chapter 3 of that section by reminding us, of course, we know that the crown of Torah is higher than the crown of priesthood and the crown of royalty. But to achieve the crown of Torah, one must dedicate oneself to Torah study, which is equal to all other mitzvot. It seems, therefore, that you should do this over all other activities, if possible, even like working at a job. And so he continues, a person whose heart inspires him to fulfill this mitzvah in a fitting manner and to become crowned with the crown of Torah should not divert his attention to other matters. He should not set his intent on acquiring Torah together with wealth and honor simultaneously. Rather, this is the path of Torah. Eat bread with salt, drink water in small measure, sleep on the ground, live a life of difficulty, and toil in Torah. And then quotes Pirkei Avot, the task is not incumbent upon you to complete, nor are you free to desist from it. And then he quotes again from Pirkei Avot, don't say, I'll earn a living first and then do Torah study, because you'll never get to the Torah study. From which he derives, you must make your work secondary. And he quotes again from Pirkei Avot, minimize your business activities and occupy yourself with Torah. Now, the Pirkei Avot piece of occupying yourself with Torah, which forms the basis of our Torah study bracha, is based on a kind of pun, or in another way, the paucity of the vocabulary in biblical Hebrew, where to occupy yourself with words of Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah, is the same word as the word for business. So to occupy we do it in English, don't we? Your occupation, instead of occupationing, occupying your mind with words of Torah. And so it's a pun, but it raises a serious question that he's addressing, which is, well, if your business is Torah, because it says, make your business Torah in your head, does that mean you don't do business in the world? And so as we're heading down a road, which seems to indicate to get your crown of Torah, preferably get some support from the communities, some tzedakah, some welfare, devote yourself to it, but just don't get rich about it, because that's going to distract you. And he says the ideal of the great Torah scholar is one who sits in the dust and is humble, who does only a minimal amount of work each day to earn their livelihood if they have nothing else to eat, and the rest of their days and nights are involved with Torah study. So once we have a pretty clear picture, Maimonides then continues in a different direction. Anyone who's ever argued in a debate knows the position you really want to support, you put second. And the position that you want to say, I understand, you put first. Famous example being the scouts coming back from exploring the land, where they say, everybody, that land of Israel God wants us to go into, it's amazing. It's just we'll get killed trying to get there, and then everyone says, let's not go, right? So you always put the argument that you don't want first, and then you follow up. So then Maimonides continues. Anyone who comes to the conclusion that he should involve himself in Torah study without doing work and derive his livelihood from the charity of the community desecrates God's name, dishonors the Torah, extinguishes the light of faith. It keeps going, brings evil upon himself, and, for good measure, forfeits life in the world to come. For it is forbidden to derive benefit from the words of Torah in this world. As they commanded and declared, our ancestors love work and despise rabbinic positions. All Torah that is not accompanied by work will eventually be negated and lead to sin. And ultimately, such a person will be a ganav, one who is in some way a thief. Rambam is also quoting from Pirkei Avot, chapter 1, saying 10. Shmaya and Avtalion received the oral tradition from them. Shmaya used to say, love work, hate acting the superior, and do not attempt to draw near to the ruling authority. Rabban Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, said, excellent is the study of the Torah when combined with a worldly occupation. For toil in them both keeps sin out of one's mind. But the study of Torah which is not combined with a worldly occupation, in the end comes to be neglected and becomes the root of sin. Laboring for the community must be done for the sake of heaven. Let me make clear the idea that you're saying, well, I'm a community leader. I'm doing community work. Rambam's going back and saying, remember that part about being humble and not having a lot to eat? What it means is you should have as much time as you can spare for serving the community, and that includes studying and teaching. But you have to have the motivation that you're really doing it for the sake of heaven, and not because a paycheck is coming, and not because there's a benefit. Rambam continues, and a person gains more wisdom from Torah when studied at night, in the hours after work, in the hours that others use for drinking and such activities. Tikkun Leil Shavuot. Our sages declared, the song of Torah can be heard only at night, as it says in Eicha, arise, sing out in the night. There's an honest debate that goes on. What is the role of devoting oneself to study and to Torah? And there is words and messages in the tradition that see an absolute beauty in devoting as much time as possible. And Rambam allows that to be part of the debate. But we are not wrong to see another part of the debate when those who speak on behalf of Jewish tradition and actively seek to negate the opinions of others, including a voice in our beloved land, claim that the second part does not exist. that being supported by the larger community for full-time study is not the path to the redemption of any of us. Shabbat Shalom.